Welcome to episode number 33 of Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. What's it like to live life with God? We give an opportunity for ordinary Christians to just share their God stories. And I don't know about you, but I find it incredibly faith bolstering. It buoys me up when I need it. Well, guys, my name is Eric Nevins. I am your host. You can get show notes for this episode and every episode of Halfway There at ericnevins.com. Please go there, check that out. If you haven't subscribed in iTunes, you can do that there. There are links all over the website if you want to find an easy way to do that. Well, today is episode 33. We are in between seasons. I call these between-episodes. We've actually been this way a little bit for the last few weeks because we had Advent, had the season end at the end of November, and then we had Advent series. I hope some of you enjoyed those. And then we had a couple episodes here before the new season starts. So season 3 starts next week. I'm so excited about that. I've already got a few conversations in the can, as they say, and I think you are really going to enjoy some of these stories. Definitely some interesting people that God is bringing my way, and their stories are so helpful in just interpreting and encouraging you as you try to live your own story as well. Well, today I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about some of the things that I've learned as I've been interviewing all these people. I've done 25 interviews now that have been published on the show, and some themes have started to come out. So here's the first, or here just one really that I want to talk about, and it's this. But I'm going to use Abraham to talk about it. So in Hebrews 11, the great Hall of Faith chapter. You guys are familiar with that, I'm guessing. In verse 17, it says this: "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, 'Through Isaac shall your offspring be named.' He considered that God was able to raise him up from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back." Okay, so he says, Abraham believed that God would raise him up from the dead if he sacrificed Isaac. If you remember that story, God asks Abraham to go up to the mountain in Genesis 22 and sacrifice Isaac. And Abraham doesn't flinch. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't do anything but just go. And that fascinates me, because how do you get to a place where you would do that, where you do something like that? Now, it wasn't weird in Abraham's day for a deity to ask for the sacrifice of a child. It'd be strange in our day, but it wasn't weird, which is probably why God asked Abraham to do it. But this is the kid he'd waited for so long. It was like 25 years that he waited for his kid. And when God asks Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, he rubs it in. He says, here's verse 2 of Genesis 22. "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountain, one of the mountains I'll show you." Take your son, your only son, the one you love. I mean, he just lays it on. And he makes sure that Abraham gets the point, right? And Abraham knows, but he's going to trust. How do you get like that? Because here's the thing, this is not the first time Abraham has had to trust God. And so I think one of the things that comes out of these episodes of Halfway There is that you learn to trust God. We learn to trust God over time through experience with him. That is the important thing. And that's what I want to share with you. I have just a couple of ideas. Number one, Abraham was called by God in Genesis chapter 12 to leave his father's country and to go to a land that God would show Abraham. And he had to trust. He had to trust in God's promise. This was a big promise that God was giving Abraham. And so he went. He trusted him. I'm guessing that Abraham had some sort of connection to God already. Definitely Abraham's father came from the line, if you read Genesis, the end of Genesis 11, came from this line of people who had known about God. And so Abraham probably had some sort of frame of reference for God already. And he must have known what that was like, or at least something that God was trustworthy. Or maybe this promise was just too good to pass up, and he decided to trust in God.
I would say I came to faith as with that childlike faith through my kindergarten teacher. She told us all about Jesus, and I was like, well, he sounds like a great friend, and heaven, of course. So, I prayed the prayer and did the thing, but it never, I just always questioned it. I went through, a good Christian home and wasn't always a good Christian girl. And so I kept trying to pursue this Jesus thing and kept going my own way. And so I would keep coming back to God and saying, I just don't know if you would love me because I know all of my sin. And so I would just over and over do this. And I mean, this lasted for a long time. I met my husband. So I went to college in Birmingham, Alabama, Samford University, met my husband. We were married a year later with baby on the way. And so, there was another moment of, wow, I'm not living this Jesus thing. And I keep
Yeah.
trying. That was a lot of my effort was I'm trying, I'm trying, I'm trying. But I just didn't think God could really love me because I knew God really knew me. And we found our way in Indiana, so we've moved around a bit. Um, in 2004 to 2002, 2004, somewhere in there, we had landed in this beautiful faith community church called Lifeway Community Church. It was a church plant. And that pastor and that wife just loved me. And the thing was, they knew me and they saw all the mess. And I that caused me to say, wow, if they know me and love me, then it must be possible that God, this God that they love so much, knows me and loves me. And so that really led me on a trajectory to where I finally, at a funeral, no less,
Hmm.
said, said, Jesus, this has nothing to do with heaven anymore. This has to do with me wanting to know you. And in that moment, everything changed. And all that ability and work and trying to be good enough for Jesus to love me just fell away. And suddenly I was able to begin really walking out what it looked like to do what I call the Jesus thing. So,
Wow.
yeah.
How interesting that your old life died at the funeral,
It did.
right?
And I mean, I have an issue with funerals. I don't like them.
Well, I don't know if anybody
No,
likes them.
yeah. And it's kind of comical because we were hosting a kind of an outdoor Bible club for a neighborhood, and I happened to be the only person without any responsibility the day of this funeral for a man I did not know. And the church was taking food to his family, and they said, Amy, we need you to drive the food out. And I was like, oh, no, please, no, not me and a funeral and food. Um, so I drove out to a funeral of someone I had no idea and took food. And that was
Wow.
the only reason I was there.
So would you say, let me ask you this as a question. Would you say that you had known of Jesus before and knew him personally then, or how would you put that?
It's funny, my husband and I were talking about this last weekend, and, I told him, I said, I've come to a place that I'm just okay not knowing,
Hmm.
and letting that be a mystery with God,
Sure.
but knowing that God knows me and I'm his, and that it was a journey for me. I think it as you said, it's probably a journey for a lot of people.
Yep.
And I think I truly loved Jesus as a child
Hmm.
and wanted to know him, but I didn't understand that I didn't have to put any effort into the being loved.
I think it's like that. I think we need to see some sort of example of God. I think that promise that God gave Abraham was enough to make him go and trust and see what he would do. And sometimes it's like that. The second thing I want to say about this is it's not always perfect. Our faith is not always perfect. And sometimes we learn about the goodness of God by the mistakes that we make. We learn about how kind and generous he is to us when we screw it up, when we don't trust him. Abraham had that on a couple of occasions at least. He almost immediately after God calls him, he follows, but then he doesn't trust God to take care of him. They go into Egypt because of a famine, and Pharaoh sees that Sarah is very attractive and brings her into his realm of wives and women. But Abraham didn't trust, and he brings this kind of destruction upon them. And God shows him that he does care. He does care about Sarah and about Abraham, and he would have taken care of him. And then again, after waiting for years and years and years, Abraham went ahead and took Hagar for his wife and said, okay, well, this is how we do it. If the wife isn't producing children, then we'll go to the maidservant and she'll produce children. Then they'll be our offspring. And God then says, even then, it's a mistake on Abraham's part. It's not what God wanted. And God tells him, no, that's not. No, the child that I'm going to give you is going to come from Sarah, not from Hagar, not from the things that you did to take matters into your own hands. And Abraham learned about God then, too. And he learned that God really meant what he said.
It was about 12 years ago. He was told that his job was going to be ending and that he had the offer to either take a severance or to move to Houston. So we chose to go to Houston, but we had prayed really literally since March until we'd have to go, which would have been August. Lord, is there a job here in Denver? And nothing. Jobs were just scarce. And so we went to Houston, and on day 10, Pete came to me and he said, if I told you to pack your bags, we're going back to Denver, what would you say? And I said, they're packed, when are you leaving? And at that very moment, I knew that I'd stepped over a huge line because I should have checked with the Lord and see what he thought about that. Because who knows the plans and purposes he had for us in Houston. Because he didn't provide the job in Denver. It's interesting to talk with Pete. He has a whole different take on it. He said going to Denver was never God's will. And he didn't believe God's will was such that if you did this, you're wrong if you go here. He felt like God gives you choices. So, but I knew in my heart, I guess, that I'd stepped over a pretty big line by not checking with God first to make sure he was okay with it. And I was pretty much mature in my faith at that point that I knew what I was doing. It's kind of like, a teenager that knows better and yet still choosing to do something he knows he shouldn't do.
Was it just kind of a restless, sometimes people call that a check, or just just a sense in your spirit?
Yeah, I just knew I guess I was wanting to go back to Denver for selfish reasons. My best friend was there, which, that's part of been my journey too in the last 4 or 5 years. God just showing me that he wants to be my all in all. That it's him that I need to check in with. That's him that I need to get the approval on and the making decisions to see if he's okay with it, rather than being dependent on man. So I don't know if you want me to go more into my story on that.
Yeah, so you had moved to Houston, and then you were ready to come back to Denver, and you said, okay, let's go. And then you felt like, okay, I didn't really check with the Lord.
And I didn't do anything about it. I just went. We just came back.
Yeah. So how did you feel during that time?
I think for me personally, I just knew there was not so much a wrestling as there was not peace, whatever that looks like or feels like. You just know you're not doing the right thing, you're not. And so kind of continued on with life. I think I ignored whatever was going on, didn't really want to deal with it, didn't want to go there until one day God just, I think I had the courage to ask him, because there had been a lull maybe of 3-4 years at this point from moving from Houston back to Denver. And there's just a lot of, I saw it mostly in relationally, that things weren't good relationally with other people. Maybe in my knee-jerk reactions to people, maybe I would have had self-control before, and now I'm like, no, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And the way I looked at it was that if I could step over that line of not checking in with the Lord on a decision pretty significantly where I'm going to live, all the other lines were easy to step over, as far as treating people a certain way or whatever.
Sure.
So one day I just asked the Lord when I just noticed that, gosh, who am I? What's going on here? And I just said, Lord, when did this all begin? And he just spoke very clearly back in my spirit, and he just had one word, and he said, Houston. And I knew immediately.
Wow.
And I just said, Lord, I'm really sorry. You're right. I didn't check in with you, and I disobeyed you, and will you forgive me? It was just one of those. And I just kind of asked him, is there anything else?
Abraham learned to trust God by waiting for God. He waited over 25 years for God to fulfill the promise. God said, you are going to be a mighty nation, and you're going to have so many descendants that you won't even be able to count them. And then he had to wait. Abraham had to wait 25 years until the birth of Isaac, and he'd perhaps begun to lose faith. Begun to decide, you can see that. He said, okay, we'll do it like we just talked about. We'll do it our way. We'll just use a maidservant to produce an heir. And God said, no. And so they kept waiting. They just kept waiting. And they had to wait for God to come through and to change the way that they believed. And then finally, they get these 3 visitors, and the visitors say, oh no, your wife's going to be pregnant, and a year from now you're going to have a baby. And they kind of laugh about it and like, yeah, we don't think so. And it comes true. Imagine that. So when we talk about Abraham and faith, and how did Abraham have the faith to sacrifice Isaac without questioning it? He just said, okay, we're going. I think he learned it in the long haul. He learned it through experience, because that's how it's grown.
Well, the next piece was the healing piece. My firstborn son was about 4.5, and he wasn't very well. He had an intestinal kind of problem and couldn't eat very many foods. And I had a word from the Lord that he was going to heal him. And it was kind of crazy because it was the most kind of audibly I'd heard the Lord speak. I'm not from a background of hearing the Lord speak. It was considered superstitious and unsafe.
Right.
So we were trained to kind of only listen to the Lord as principle that we distilled through Bible study.
Right.
So I was on a journey of getting the hang of what does that mean, listening to the Lord? How do we do that? And all of a sudden he said to me, I'm a healer and I want to heal your family. So within 2 weeks of that, he'd healed my son. And it was quite a dramatic thing, because he went from being able to eat a very narrow range of foods to being able to eat anything. And he grew really fast for the next year.
Wow.
So he was at a point of not really growing and just not looking like a healthy kid. And he grew really, really fast, grew about 12 inches in a year. And that got me to a place where I basically sat down with the Lord and I said, all right, here's the deal. I've been living firstly behind a theology of suffering and poverty, then behind a theology of cessationism that says you don't heal anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm getting ripped off. And I just cried. I really was so moved by it. I thought, God, I've got whatever I've got, 80 years or 90 years on this earth. I don't want to spend every 10 years living towards my next theological breakthrough, because all I'm discovering is the limitations of that set of ideas. And so I said, please, could you take me into a journey where you are the limitation? Like, if there's something there for my safety or protection, then limit me. But if not, show me who you are.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you've enjoyed these few thoughts about Abraham and about the spiritual life. But trusting God comes through experience. That's why we do this show. That's why we share episodes. Next week, episode number 34 is the beginning of season 3, and we've got brand new episodes coming to you every week on Monday. Hey, if you haven't taken the time to go out to iTunes, search for Halfway There, and leave a rating or review, would you do that for me? It does help the show. It helps so much to boost us up in Apple's rankings and to get more people to see that there's other people out there like them. So if you've been encouraged by the show, share it with a friend, leave a rating review on iTunes, or share the show on social media. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Until next week, keep the faith.